So yesterday we have seen the meeting between Donald Trump, President Zelensky, and also Vice President of Trump, J.D. Vance. The media was taking over, but what happened yesterday, pretty much, it's still the only thing anybody talks about, with the world being, and I mean most of the free world, being fully behind Zelensky. Many of them reaffirming their fight or sort of their defense, and the fact that Ukraine has been invaded by Russia, and sort of reminding of the moral superiority of Ukrainians at this point. And a lot of Republicans are standing behind Trump, are reaffirming everything he said, and many of the commentators are also pretty much fully defending basically what has happened. We did talk about it yesterday, but when we did it yesterday, it was pretty much right when it was happening, so we weren't as prepared. So today we'll try to take a look again. Hopefully not be as emotional, because I think it's hard to sort of not be morally outraged by what has happened. But I think it's also important to properly analyze, I think, the real evil that has happened yesterday, and to properly name it and put it into its context. Joining me today is James Valiant. Hey, James, how have you been since yesterday, and what are your some brief thoughts on the meeting? We do have a video. I'm not sure if we want to watch it again, but maybe later we can. But I have a lot of stuff to say on. I think everybody has probably seen it, and if not, should definitely go and see it after this.
Well, I think the point you make about emotion is very important. Both sides of this, whether you're defending Trump or defending justice, let me put it that baldly, makes people very, very emotional. And a lot of it has been, the talk has been mostly psychological effusions rather than an analysis of what's going on. For example, the Trump supporters say, oh, you came to the White House and you disrespected President Trump. Well, wait a minute. Trump quite recently called Zelensky a dictator and had the nerve to say that he started the war. See, already my emotion starts creeping in, because Trump can't distinguish between the aggressor and the non-aggressor here, the person whose country was invaded and almost completely taken over. But for Ukrainian bravery, his country would have been absorbed by an aggressive dictator. So Trump's history was itself offensive to Zelensky. Zelensky was called the bad guy by Trump. Trump tried to walk it back, like a lot of the crap that comes out of Trump's mouth. He tried to say, oh, I can't imagine I would have called him a dictator, whatever that line was. But the point is that Zelensky still wants peace, still went to the White House after being personally insulted by the president, after the president morally inverted the situation. The president yesterday, there are many things that we can say about it, but what it comes down to is exactly that. Trump needed a history lesson. When Zelensky started going off, that they had for a long time, it was a friendly, at least civil exchange, until we got to a point where Zelensky had to say, wait a minute here, let's remind you of the history. In 2014, they invaded Crimea. We were still kind of fighting a war the whole time. And then, of course, they tried to take over Kyiv and the whole damn country. And his country is the country where the people are dying. Trump could have shown a little sympathy for that, again, bringing in emotion, but that would require a correct moral evaluation of the situation, and to be able to say, okay, I realize your country was invaded. But the fact that Zelensky has to give a history lesson, now, it didn't have to go this way. It didn't have to go this way at all. If Trump really does want to end the bloodshed, if he does want to act as what he says now, get this, a neutral middleman, so what does a neutral middleman do? A neutral middleman is compromising with evil. This is the cult of moral grayness. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where you may want to have a temporary peace agreement or something, or even a long-term peace agreement, and hopefully secure peace in Ukraine. But the point is that Trump, and here I would refer people to Ayn Rand's essay, The Cult of Moral Grayness. They'll point out, all the flaws of Ukraine as a government or a culture. Well, the gray is just a mixture of black and white, ladies and gentlemen. And when it comes to who's invading whom, it is that's the black and that's the white here. Trump could have said, I appreciate your position. We'll discuss that later. No, he didn't. They didn't take the high road. They didn't value ending the bloodshed, even as Trump is saying he is, in this moral compromise. It's all been pro-Putin. And so while it may be overstating the thing to say that he's just a flack for Putin, he's in effect articulating only Putin's position. So you can totally understand all those people who are saying, wait a minute, Trump, you're just a stooge for Putin, because all he's doing is articulating Trump is articulating Putin talking points. Putin was the aggressor. That's the bottom line here. Zelensky's country is at war after having been invaded. Trump showed zero sympathy to the victim. Trump showed zero willingness to just back off. What we really saw there was Trump's little fragile ego. And the way Trump defenders are looking at it is just, well, you see, you disrespected him. You disrespected Trump. Wait a minute here. What disrespect was there? I mean, I guess I've heard someone say that Zelensky called him bitch under his breath, or Vance under his breath or something. That wasn't clear to me. But wait a minute. Even at that point, had he done that, if you really want peace, if you're a true statesman or diplomat, you look past that. You look past the differences, even if there are differences, and you say, well, let's get to the bottom line. We really have this. Most significantly, Trump is not acknowledging America's interest in this, as if America was just simply being altruistic, as if America had no reason to help Ukraine, even though they're the victim of aggression here. America, well, I guess, would have no interest if Zelensky decided to invade Poland, and then your country, and then Germany. America would have no interest in that. At what point does Russia's aggression kick in an American interest, self-interest? We have a vital stake at interest. It is not just a gift from Mr. Trump. If Mr. Trump looks at it that way, he obviously hasn't changed his opinion one bit. He thinks that Zelensky was the starter of the war. The war wouldn't have happened. But under him, that's all that really matters to him, is getting that point out and getting his victory, making it look like he's the good guy here that'll bring peace. But if he really wanted peace, he could have handled yesterday differently. For example, you can see it in all kinds of ways. He pointed out, you see the hatred that Zelensky has for Putin? Well, yeah, his country was invaded. Thousands upon thousands of his own civilians have been killed in this war. Kyiv was under assault. Now, if you can't acknowledge that one side there has emotion, only the other side, only Putin, who could be threatened by what? Discussion of joining NATO? There was actually a conversation I had yesterday online, very brief conversation with someone who was arguing that when I said, boy, discussing the entrance into NATO is no threat to anybody. It's only a threat to a would-be invader. NATO has never been an aggressive alliance. Someone said, well, what would you think if Canada or Great Britain had joined the Warsaw Pact? Well, wait a minute. The Warsaw Pact wasn't a defensive alliance. It was an alliance to repress the member states, and an aggressive pact. Ask the people
to invade nations. Czechoslovakia
exactly.
was invaded.
Well, what happened in Hungary? What happened when it was Czechoslovakia? What happened then? The Warsaw Pact was an oppressive, aggressive alliance, unlike NATO. And an independent country has every right to make its own defensive arrangements. Discussing joining NATO was no objective reason to invade Ukraine, despite what Mr. Trump says. Having been invaded, one should understand that Mr. Zelensky might have the need for security guarantees. But wait a minute, we have to dismiss that altogether. We can't even say, which Trump could have said, okay, we'll discuss that. There are Europeans willing to do that. Maybe that can be part of, or this mineral deal could be part of. Instead, Zelensky made a really good point. He said, wait, there were all kinds of American and European companies doing business in Ukraine when the war started. The first one and the second time our country was invaded, there were plenty of Western companies there, and that economic alliance did not prevent us at all from being invaded. More than that, Putin has violated ceasefire agreements. Putin cannot be trusted. That's why I need security guarantees. Nothing like that could be acknowledged by Trump. Trump has totally betrayed uh, the poor invaded country. So there's that clear moral distinction between invader and invadee, the aggressor, versus the victim. But also the fact that America has an interest. America has a self-interest in making sure that we do not reward Russian aggression. Do we want another World War II? I mean, honestly, it's totally the Neville Chamberlain sort of line here that he's taking. Peace now, peace in our time, we'll end the bloodshed, as if that can appease an aggressor who stated he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Empire. Now, he's the one with nuclear weapons. He's the one that invaded Ukraine. America has a direct interest that Trump refuses to acknowledge. Yes, we're getting something out of this too. Now, if I make an agreement with you, Daniel, and I say, here, I know Daniel, you got some troubles, so let me send you some money to get you out of that trouble. And then 2 years later, I come back and I say, Daniel, when I gave you that money, you owe me. And so you give me 50% of the profit from your rare earth minerals in your country, because after all, I gave you something. Well, wait a minute here. That's changing the terms of the agreement. Now, that didn't stop Zelensky from coming. As I point out, nor did Trump's outrageous statements about Zelensky being the one to start the war. That didn't stop Zelensky from coming either. Zelensky was still willing to do the deal, willing to pay America back. He was simply saying out loud that didn't have to be part of the agreement. When the minute he said that, though, Trump jumps down his throat and acts as though this is a card game. And I think maybe the best response Zelensky had yesterday is, "We're not playing cards. No, this isn't a card game. You don't have much of a hand to play." Well, no, if there weren't rare earth minerals that you wanted, Mr. Trump, that is to say, if Zelensky didn't have a card, you wouldn't be here discussing it at all, because apparently that's the total sum of America's self-interest here as far as Mr. Trump is concerned. So I think it's important to break down the facts, get the history lesson that Zelensky was trying to give Mr. Vance here before you start getting all emotional and start saying, well, Zelensky could have done X, Y, and Z, or Zelensky should have apologized, or Zelensky shouldn't have disrespected the president by doing what? What? I mean, he's trying to defend his country from warfare. The fact that he's got a moral point, the fact that he's got a position, the fact that he has good grounds not to trust Putin, that's all to be dismissed. All to be dismissed. Trump could have acknowledged it. Trump could have said, we'll talk about that later. Don't worry, I understand you have concerns. But no, he didn't. They jumped down Zelensky's throat, obviously belying the fact that they really don't, what Trump says he wants to stop over and over is the bloodshed. Well, if that's the case, you ask for a ceasefire from the aggressor. You don't ask for a ceasefire from the victim of aggression. That didn't even enter Trump's mind, because he doesn't look at the world in terms of morality. He looks at the world in terms of his own very fragile ego. That's how I analyze yesterday.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. A super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, trivia question: who started this war? We have a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. He says, Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance, a total fucking disgrace. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert, again for a super chat. He says, Zelensky's act of aggression was to put Mr. Trump in a difficult position. Oh, cry me a river. Zelensky has been in difficult position since Putin brutally took over a huge chunk of Ukraine. Now, I want to cover some of the things people have been saying in the chat. Some of it is sort of common. We've seen everywhere. So someone has been saying the war has been going on for too long. I mean, well, first of all, why is that for you to decide what other countries should do? What do you think would happen if France, Spain, and Netherlands said to Ben Franklin, "Oh, come on, this war has been going for too long"? Well, I mean, Britain is a free nation. Why can't you just live with them. I mean, come on, what's this Declaration of Independence? Like, come on, can't you look at reality of what's actually happening? Like, America wouldn't be here without foreign aid.
Right.
Uh,
Critical foreign aid, especially from France, but as you point out, Spain as well. I mean, without that foreign aid, America would never have gotten its independence. And the war, yeah, lasted years. And as so long as the enemy's army is still on your territory, you're telling me that the war has lasted too long? Well, yeah, in one sense, I'll have to agree. Biden did not allow the proper weaponry to go. Biden did not allow in time. Biden did not allow he tied the hands of Zelensky when it came to attacking within Russia. Once you've been attacked, you have a right to attack deep in Russia. They were all afraid of this World War III business. Well, wait a minute here. Ukraine has attacked within Russia, and we don't have World War III. And what temerity, what gall it was for Trump to say, you're playing with World War III. As if Zelensky, whose country has been invaded, and all he wants is security guarantees to protect his country from further, aggression. Uh, he's the one who's playing with World War III. No, Mr. Trump, it is you playing with World War III. Because if you allow a Hitler to get away with aggression in Europe, you're going to. That's what's playing with World War III. Once you appease the aggressor, don't be surprised if you get more aggression. If Estonia or Latvia get invaded, it's because you have just rewarded it, Mr. Trump. You're the Neville Chamberlain here. You're the one playing with a new world war. Only now we have nuclear bombs. And if the war has lasted too long, it's because Biden didn't properly arm Ukraine with the proper weapons in the right way and allow them to attack in Russia, which is what should have happened earlier, much, much earlier. In any case, so long as the Russian army is there in Ukraine, how can someone say, well, Zelensky should stop the war? Well, wait a minute here. How much of the United States would we surrender to an aggressor? Look, they've only got Washington and Alaska, Oregon, and California. Let's let the Soviet or the Russians keep that part of it. And gosh, the war has lasted so long, we may as well just give them California and the West Coast and Alaska and be happy with it. Take the win, as it were. Trump is
yeah, I
not.
mean, after all, isn't Alaska Russian? I mean, come on, James. It has a lot of Russian immigrants still remaining from the last time it was owned by the Russian company and part
We
of the Russian
purchased it from
Empire.
the czars. The United States purchased Alaska from the czars. It was called Seward's Folly. It was under the Lincoln administration. But the point, though, is what if Russia did say, hey, wait a minute? And, Russian explorers came all the way down to California. Northern California actually had a Russian fort in it. So what if Russia claimed its old imperial claims to the American West Coast? What do? We give them California and Alaska and Washington and Oregon. And gosh, we should really be grateful because we want to stop the bloodshed. We want to stop the bloodshed. And
Yeah,
gosh, the war has gone on so long. We should just sign off the West Coast to the Russian aggression. Now, that's exactly how I hear it.
yeah, and going further into this kind of diplomacy, again, the idea of mutually assured destruction, the idea of nations that have atomic weapons do not generally go to war with each other, means that neither side does that. What happens when one side that has atomic weapons starts invading nations, and we, because we are afraid of mutually assured destruction, refuse to give any sort of answer. So Russia gets to take over Ukraine and then Georgia, and then if Iran develops
Poland and
nuclear
then
weapons,
Estonia.
yeah, and
Yeah,
if Iran develops nuclear weapons, Iran gets to take over Israel with Hamas.
we don't want to
North
play with
Korea
World
gets to
War
take
III.
over South Korea. China gets to take over Taiwan. I mean,
Oh,
when
imagine the Taiwan situation. You know how disrespectful the leader of Taiwan was when China. Let's imagine communist China invades the island of Taiwan. I can imagine the exact analogous conversation. The leader of Taiwan should recognize, their role in this. That we should stop the bloodshed. They shouldn't play with World War III. Look at the hatred of the Taiwanese against Xi for invading their country. All the same language could be applied if it were an invasion of Taiwan. I want everyone out there to really think hard how this would be any different. Honestly, the aggressor is the aggressor here. You can point out whatever flaws you want. You can say, well, geez, America should have already put strings on the money, et cetera, earlier. No, 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 no. what we're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, is a situation in which America has a self-interest in discouraging Russian aggression in Europe. If we really want world peace, we don't allow nuclear powers to just gobble up their neighbors at will and say, geez, that would be starting World War III if we fought back. By that logic, you can may as well just give Russia Poland and any other country in Europe they might want to have. Or to say you want to stop the bloodshed, well, that means capitulate to any aggressor. No. And the way he's looking at it is all in terms of emotion and him, Trump. Don't disrespect me. I can call you the aggressor. I can call you a dictator. Oh, then kind of take it back. And then when you still have the decency to show up at the White House to say, I'll sign over this mineral deal, changing the terms on which the previous aid was given, by the way, without those strings, he's still willing to do it. And you're saying he's the one disrespecting you. No. And besides, a real diplomat, a real statesman, if he really was trying to look past, let's say it was not so stark and evil as aggression here, an invasion of one country to another. Let's just say it was a normal diplomatic context in which you're trying to make an arrangement between two countries that are having a disagreement. You would, if you were trying to be an honest third-party broker here, you wouldn't act like, oh, my ego is so fragile, my ego is so, how dare you disrespect me? No, he wants respect. Trump wants glory and honor and, you know, be carried on the shoulder. He wants, I don't know what kind of Napoleon complex he's got, but the point is he wants the credit more than he wants the bloodshed to stop. And he behaved like a man who really didn't want the bloodshed. Because when you say bloodshed to stop without saying who caused the war is already morally corrupt. But then when you say, I want the bloodshed to stop, and then one of the parties comes in, you say, well, you're not respecting me enough. Oh, yeah, that really shows you really want peace. You really want the bloodshed to stop. It's madness. That's why the emotion thing that we started with is so important. Everyone is looking at it through sort of emotional lenses. This is the time when we need to stop and look at it through correct moral glasses. When we come to a moral evaluation, it is appropriate to have the emotion. And believe me, over the last 24 hours, I've been quite emotional about this, but I'm doing my very best to remain objective and to say, well, wait, Zelensky was right. There needs to be a little history lesson because after all, Mr. Trump, you seem to get it wrong when it comes to who invaded who is the good guy, who is the bad guy in that sense, which is the key sense when it comes to American and European interests here. Do we want an aggressive dictator gobbling up countries in Europe? Can we reward it? Rewarding it, will that get us actually peace? See, Trump will say, well, I created peace. You see, it was peaceful under me. Well, I want security guarantees, Zelensky says. Well, they didn't happen under me. Trump says, well, geez, this agreement is happening under me. But Zelensky makes the proper point. Look at all the times Putin violated ceasefires and agreements. Look at the fact that there were American companies here, Mr. President, doing business when Russia invaded. That was no security guarantee. And without that, without even addressing Zelensky's need for security, I mean, get that. I mean, he's totally taken Russia's side, and you can see why people are looking at it that way. Because without even acknowledging that there might be a need for security guarantees on Zelensky's part, taking that as a personal affront, as personal offense, and getting all emotional about it. That is not statesmanlike behavior. That is not a man who wants peace. That is a man whose ego is more fragile, and his fragile ego is than I can imagine safe in a world leader. But imagine a world leader whose ego is so fragile that it is more important than actually stopping the bloodshed that he claims he wants to stop. Even looking at it through the lens of Trump's distorted history. But Trump has distorted history. Russia's the aggressor. We have to stop Russian aggression. We cannot reward Russian aggression, or we will get more of it.
Someone says Putin will retire after Ukraine, so he's not gobbling anything. Yeah, that's a typical feature of dictators, is that they retire. You know, James, remember when Stalin and Kim Jong-il and Saddam Hussein sort of retired, because, they've done their duty towards the country and now they're going to enjoy their life. No, the only people who retire are presidents of free nations like George Washington. This is not an action you see from dictators.
It is insane. If you're a political enemy of Putin's, he will kill you. He will kill you whether you're in Russia or whether you're outside of Russia, whether you're a politician or a journalist. He will send you to Siberia, to some labor camp where you'll never be heard from again. The man uses violence and force to stay in power. That kind of man is not just simply going to step aside, because guess what happens to dictators when they step aside? No, if he, what this war could have done is forced Putin to step aside if he clearly loses, if he clearly lost. But no, if he has some bragging rights at the end of this, then what we'll end up doing is keeping a dictator who murders his political opponents in power. No, wait. Putin is a dictator. Dictators don't just voluntarily surrender their power. And Putin was the aggressor here. He aggressed against another nation in Europe. And all this BS about talk that would allow Ukraine to join NATO was never a moral justification for warfare. It's not a threat to you, Mr. Putin. It's only a threat to you insofar as you're a would-be invader. And, oh, well, geez, you did invade. He is the aggressor here. It's that simple. We got a dictator who aggressed against a neighboring country. It's that clear, ladies and gentlemen. But clear moral logic apparently is beyond. Here I'm getting emotional again. But clear moral logic apparently is beyond Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance's capacity.
Someone says,
he should have been grateful. He should have groveled. Zelensky didn't grovel enough.
Yeah, I have a point on that I want to bring in. Someone says Putin is no Stalin. Thank goodness. I mean, what essentially I don't see any difference. Maybe in scale when it comes to how many people directly he ordered to kill, or political opponents he directly ordered to
he hasn't starved tens of millions of people yet. Okay, I'll grant you he hasn't starved, and get this, mostly in Ukraine. Who was it that Stalin was starving to death? Whole villages were disappeared off the map when Stalin was ruling, and ruling in Ukraine, by the way, tens of millions of people. Okay, so Putin hasn't starved tens of millions of Ukrainians yet. He has killed tens of thousands of them in this war. And so if he's not yet Stalin in the scope of his bloodshed, it's not for some moral character on the part of Mr. Putin, is it? As I point out, he sends his enemies, his political enemies, to either shoots them, kills them, poisons them, uses radioactivity against them, or sends them to Siberia. The man's a dictator. A dictator is a dictator, and he is an aggressive dictator. And aggressive dictators are threats to the whole world, including the United States. The blow to the American leaders used to have some, because America, once upon a time, Americans like to think they're doing the right thing, the moral thing. And once upon a time, we had something that went beyond, realpolitik pragmatism. But that's shot forever. How can any country now trust America's word? How would you want to do business with America? I mean, Trump said, we can't do business this way. Well, there you go, Mr. Trump, Mr. Art of the Deal. Mr. Boaster, who said that he could get an agreement that would stop this war the day he came into office on January 20th. He said that last year when he was running for president. At the time, I recall saying on this show that it's going to prove a little more complicated than Mr. Trump thinks it will. It has proved more complicated because Mr. Trump can't acknowledge Mr. Zelensky's real needs. Security needs after having been invaded by an aggressive dictator. And Trump can't acknowledge America's interest in doing so. No, we're just acting altruistically out of the kindness of our heart. So you owe us money, even though we gave you the money without any strings attached. Now I'm going to attach strings. And if you don't agree to those strings and give me a profitable deal, I have no interest in this. That is, yes, okay, I'll get to the point where I morally evaluate and say that is morally despicable. That is a tragedy for world safety. That is a reward to aggressive dictators. There's no other. Hey, Trump, he'll praise Putin. He'll praise Xi. Oh, I respect him. He's intelligent. He's strong. He's a good guy. He's, they write love letters to dictators, whether it's the, Kim in North Korea or Xi in China or Putin in Russia, even willing to negotiate with the mullahs in Iran. There isn't anyone so evil in this world that Trump won't negotiate with him. But Zelensky's the bad guy. Zelensky, we have to focus on whatever problems there might be in Ukraine and et cetera, and we have to overemphasize that. Oh, indeed, we have to blame Zelensky for the war. He was the one who started it by considering joining NATO. He wasn't the victim of aggression. It's totally morally inverted. Mr. Trump is on the wrong side of history here, and I fear that we will see the consequences play out. The consequences that are almost inevitably play out in history when you reward aggressive dictators.
Yes, someone is saying Ukraine not holding elections sounds pretty dictatorial to me. My question for you would be, what do you think about constitutional violations? What do you make of when there is something written in the constitution, and if that gets violated, do you think that is dictator-like? Because that would be what would happen if you called an election. Under the Ukrainian law, and again, you might disagree with it, but under Ukrainian law, during martial law, which is in effect as long as the war is going on, you cannot hold an election. That is simply something that's in the law. If you are in America, not to mention, for example, also United Kingdom didn't hold any elections during World War II. Now, there might be now that is what law is. In America, there is no exception you could do. You have to hold an election. And there was an election during Civil War. There was an election during every single conflict America was in, because that's what you have to do according to the Constitution. But you have to have a respect. You have to have a respect for law. They are following the law. There is nothing new that was being created. Recently, the Ukrainian parliament did sort of a performative vote, but basically reaffirmed Zelensky as a president unanimously. Basically, not a single person present voted against.
Well, I think there might be some practical issues when you're fighting a war with running an election. When 20%, what is it, still 20%
20%.
used to be Ukraine is occupied by the Russian army. You think there might be a difficulty in doing an election there? I mean, that is, again, blaming the victim of aggression. You should be having elections, even though 1/5 of your country is occupied by Russian armies, and Russians are still attacking you wherever they can. Wherever they can. And as Mr. Zelensky pointed out, it didn't matter whether it was a European company or an American company. The Russians just came in, blasted it, took it over, you name it. It's not only in the Ukrainian constitution that you can't have elections during martial law. It seems to me we have a big, fat practical problem here with Russia attacking Ukraine and with 20% of their country under Russian occupation having an election. You disenfranchise a huge part of the electorate right there. It just makes no sense. They're the victims of aggression here. A war is going on. That's the other thing Trump didn't recognize. He didn't acknowledge even. I mean, to even acknowledge emotionally, when Zelensky was talking to Vance, he said, why don't you come? You've never been to Ukraine. Why don't you come to Ukraine and talk to our people and ask them what they've been going through? No sympathy to that degree. No sympathy for the victims of aggression, whatever. It's such a despicable moral inversion here that and all for Mr. Trump's sake, so that he can say he was the great peacemaker.
Yeah, I'll just expand on that point a little bit, because even when election during Civil War happened in America, the southern states didn't participate while being formally still part of the Union. Now, if there was an election in Ukraine, and again, there would have to be a change in law. A constitutional law would have to be passed for it to be even declared. But again, even if there was, someone says Zelensky suspended elections. He cannot suspend elections. It's the parliament is the one that even does this.
And in
Now,
America, the states run elections.
yeah.
We don't have federal elections. Each state does elections using their own rules. The southern states had seceded from the Union and refusing to participate in the United States government any longer. It's senseless to have elections for United States congressmen if you're no longer part of the U.S. Congress. So, only in the North did they still have elections, because there is no such provision as there is in the Ukrainian Constitution. And even though the war reached places like Pennsylvania, it's totally unreasonable to demand that. Besides, as I say, some little fig leaf of sympathy for the victim of aggression could have been offered. Instead, it was now that's why you have to look at this as a rationalization for aggression. That's what Trump is doing. He's rationalizing aggression. If you can't show any sympathy for the victim of aggression when he's saying, hey, wait a minute here, my country has been attacked. Let me give you a history lesson, Mr. Vance. You say, well, that's offense. Oh, we're offended. No, a statesman will look past being personally offended. If being personally offended, if being dishonored, disrespected, even insulted was what made the difference, then let me suggest that it's Mr. Trump's ego that is the problem here. A politician's own personal ego should not be getting in the way of trying to stop a war if that's really what you're after, Mr. Trump. It's plain that that's not even what your main value here was. It's your ego, your credit. That's the whatever would have happened under me kind of thing. How dare you insult me, even though I said you caused the war and I called you a dictator just a few days ago? You're insulting me.
Someone says Zelensky declared martial law that suspended election. Their constitution says no elections during martial law. So again, you're moving the goalposts because you said Zelensky himself declared it has to be reaffirmed by parliament.
Kyiv was under attack.
And you also have the Supreme Court in Ukraine. Like all branches of government agree with what is happening. I have no idea what do you want me to sort of say to that. If you know, when prohibition happened in America, it was wrong, but majority, or I think how many? 2/3 of the states have to approve. The 3/4 of the states approve it. The president is the one who starts it. Then you have all the or like super majority of the senators, majority of Congress, Supreme Court. Well, technically, Supreme Court, I guess, is not involved if it's a amendment, but it's a like everybody is on point. And similarly in Ukraine, everybody is on basically on the same page when it comes to this. If you have a problem with that, you have a problem with what you have a problem with the decisions Ukrainians are doing. You don't have a problem with Zelensky being a dictator. You don't have a problem with any branch of the government. You just have a problem with the fact that Ukrainians have a different opinion than you, and you want them to surrender. That's all there is. And again, what would happen to the millions of Ukrainians currently under Russian occupation during any election, or to the Crimeans? I mean, Crimea was illegally annexed and still is, and those have been
Trump
basically
let Russia get away with that. By the way, you know, he used to boast. Now, get this: 8 years ago, his big boast was, well, when Crimea was invaded, all Obama did was send blankets, you know, and food. I'm sending weapons. Trump used to boast. I'm saying, well, why, Mr. Trump, did you send weapons? Because they were the victims of aggression. Now, the thing that Trump says would never have happened under my watch. What happened? Remember 3 years ago, folks, the assault on Kyiv? Russia tried to take over the entire country. They laid Kyiv under siege from multiple directions. It was only the courage of the Ukrainian people that kept most of Ukraine from being completely taken over by an aggressor. Zelensky did not just arbitrarily declare martial law. In fact, his whole country was being gobbled up by an aggressive dictator. It's as though Zelensky was just arbitrarily declaring martial law. No, his country was 3 years ago, the capital of his country was under siege from multiple directions from Putin. The Russian incompetence combined with Ukrainian courage is all that prevented that from happening. Even Western Ukraine would now be occupied by Russia, but for those factors. No, you act as though Zelensky is just being arbitrary in declaring martial law. No, when does a martial law, there's a provision in the Ukrainian constitution about martial law. When does that kick in fairly? When can the parliament or the president declare it, you think? Well, maybe when the country's been invaded? The whole damn country's been invaded, and 20% of the country is still, that used to be, 4 years ago, is still being occupied by Russia? I mean, geez, it's all about dropping context altogether to defend Trump and Mr. Trump's fragile ego here. Mr. Trump doesn't want the bloodshed to stop. He wants a mineral deal that'll make him look good. He wants to look like he's the peacemaker. He doesn't care about moral right and wrong. He doesn't care about the long-term effects of rewarding aggressive dictatorships. It's obvious none of those factors are even involved in Mr. Trump's thinking. He doesn't even think that America has any other self-interest, and that it was all a bunch of altruism on America's part to give those whatever support we had. When Trump himself once boasted that he gave weapons rather than blankets to Ukraine after the Crimean invasion. No, the man. It yes, there is reason to be emotional because the moral evaluation here is highly negative, and every true lover of peace, should be frightened. Should be frightened that a man puts his own pride, as he sees it, and I put the term in quotes because it's no real pride. His fragile ego is the way to look at it. The fragile ego of a narcissist, and here I am psychologizing, and the very thing I didn't want to do from the outset. But really, there's no other way to understand this. It's Trump getting the credit, Trump getting the glory, Trump getting the praise. That's what Trump is all about. If peace, ending the bloodshed, as he puts it, were his highest value, he would have calmed it down yesterday. He would have said, I understand your position. I understand why, even if Zelensky got emotional, because after all, the man's country has been invaded. He said, I understand your position. We'll talk later about security guarantees. He could have done that. But no, his fragile ego was more important than what he even says his main value is, bringing peace to the region. Bull. But all that is even wrong. He's even starting from a mentally wrong place, as we could tell days ago when he called Zelensky the cause of the war by considering joining NATO. You're playing cards here. That's what it is. You get that. Get the ultimate pragmatist. Get the ultimate pragmatist language from yesterday. We're playing cards here. Zelensky probably said, this isn't a card game. You don't have the cards. Well, you wouldn't, obviously, Mr. Trump, you wouldn't be here if we didn't have these rare earth minerals. You just make us lay down and die, surrender to Russia. Is that the alternative here? And it's pure altruism on your part to not let Russia take over another country. Okay. Aggressive dictators are okay with you. Got it. Check. It's madness.
Yeah, now
it's the triumph of evil. The title that you chose for today was absolutely correct. When Zelensky was treated as abysmally as he was yesterday, and with the way that Trump is being defended emotionally, in an emotionalist way, to defend his fragile little ego, and that's what it's all about for the Trump defenders. It is the triumph of evil at the because of an important world leader's fragile ego.
Now, someone in the chat has been saying, I've lost the message, but something like socialist Europe should help Ukraine, not America. Europe has provided more aid towards Ukraine than United States. Now, when it comes to also when it comes to percentage of GDP, many countries, I think about a dozen of countries, including Slovakia, has provided more support as a percentage of GDP. Now, not to mention something that America hasn't had to deal with are the Ukrainian refugees. When the war started, in my own town, you had dozens. I mean, in just my small village, you had families, Ukrainian families, fleeing the war, basically being afraid of what's going to happen. And many countries in Europe had to take care of those refugees and have set up systems to provide for those refugees. I think specifically in Slovakia, they had like a break from paying taxes for like 2 years or something if they wanted to start working. So it also wasn't just like free help. It was also a certain amount of integration, helping, providing the support and the moral support. Slovakia had one of the biggest sort of voluntary ammunition donations by people because the government has decided, we had an election recently and the government has decided they're not going to support Ukraine. So we had Slovak people themselves managing to gather up millions of euros for munition for fighting Ukraine. Now, again, the moral support should be absolutely on the Ukrainian side. That is not even a question. And even when you want to talk about a sort of maybe some potential deal, because the fact is the line hasn't moved in about 2 years or hasn't moved that much, which again means Russia is losing. Russia has to take over all of Ukraine. That was the goal. They are failing at that. Ukraine is unfortunately not managing to push out Russia completely, but is holding on against one of the biggest armies in the world right now. They provided more bravery than pretty much we've ever seen, at least recently. Um, we should be behind Ukrainians. It's not even a question. And the fact that Trump, when he called Zelensky a dictator, but when asked if Putin was a dictator, he said, "I don't use this word lightly." Um,
And he used the word, and then he denied using the word. Or did I say that? Whatever the hell he said afterwards, trying to deny that he said. Now, if you really want peace, are you going to call one of the players in any deal a dictator, insult him like that? Zelensky was the one who was personally insulted and disrespected by Trump, not the other way around. But getting back to support, Europe's support, you measure it properly by percentage of GDP. Trump
no,
does not.
even by total, Ukraine is ahead
Yeah,
of United States.
but the proper way of analyzing it is percentage of GDP, which would really show how much European support there is. Trump doesn't look at it that way. Trump doesn't look at it. He will give you raw numbers, and I don't even trust the numbers Trump gives
No,
anymore.
those are.
But the point is, he'll use raw numbers and compare it to Europe. But wait a minute. Even if Europe hadn't done that, would you say that about Hitler? Would you say, okay, well, since France and Britain aren't spending as much as America, America has no interest in letting France and Britain get attacked by the Nazis? No, you wouldn't say that. That's not what America said at the time. We would say we have an interest because guess what happens when Hitler takes over France and then Britain? You think he's going to stop there? No. So the point is, America has an interest. Not only do we have economic and political interests around the world. I mean, Europe is supposed to be America. Most of Europe, at least, is supposed to be America's allies. Not only do we have economic and political interests at stake there, America's own security is at stake here. So even if Europe was doing nothing, even let me just put the hypothetical right back at the questioner. Even if Europe was doing nothing, America should stop Russian aggression. America had a vested, selfish interest at stake here. It's not a card game. It's America's security. It's the security of Western civilization. And that's the way Mr. Trump should look at it, as opposed to, look how much we've spent versus, and if the Europeans don't want to do it, then why the hell should we? No, an aggressive dictator is a threat to everybody. An aggressive dictator threatening Europe is threatening civilization, is threatening key allies, trading partners of the United States. And he won't stop there at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Putin wants to reconstitute the old Soviet empire. Do you think that will satisfy? If he should ever succeed in doing that, do you think that will, that's what really stops aggressive dictators, is winning and getting stuff and getting rewards for it. That'll stop him. You really think that'll stop him? Because after all, once Japan, invades China, they won't attack the Philippines or Southeast Asia or Pearl Harbor. I mean, it's the same damn logic. At some point, the aggressor will hit your port in Hawaii too, America. And while Trump emphasizes how America is blessedly separated from the old world by big oceans, nonetheless, the world has grown smaller and smaller. And we're talking about a nuclear power here in Russia. America has a direct, vested, selfish interest in stopping Putin's aggression and not rewarding a dictator's aggression. And that's what we're talking about here, folks. An aggressive dictator. Trump can't even articulate that. Trump can't get that concept out of his mouth because he doesn't believe it in his head. And he doesn't give a crap anyway. He respects dictators. For all I know, he loves dictators. There's no dictator on this planet who he wouldn't send a love letter to and praise to the skies. But Mr. Zelensky, a victim of an aggressive dictator, a nuclear armed aggressive dictator, he's the bad guy. He started the war. He hasn't been handling it properly. And how dare you disrespect me with a history lesson?
Yeah, I actually wanted to go into the thank yous sort of earlier. How much time do you have, James? Because we have
Now
been
let's keep going.
okay, so Yeah, when it comes to, I made this point yesterday, and I'll make it again because I really do like it. One of my favorite John Stossel videos, and I have to find the original one, but he basically talks about the free trade and the fact that when you go to a store and you buy something, you say thank you, and they say thank you,
You
despite
think
it is understood that both of you benefit from trade. It's not zero sum. And I think when it comes to foreign aid, it should be thought of the same way. We support, me especially, Slovakia supports Ukraine because we understand what's in stake, and America should too. I think if you have a proper understanding, Russia has been meddling in European elections and American elections. Russia has been fighting Americans in Syria, has been or sort of proxies. America is or Russia is supporting Hezbollah, is supporting Iran, is supporting North Korea, is supporting China. Although all of those are direct and either direct or indirect enemies of America, Russia even more directly has been helping the Houthis attack international shipping. If you don't recognize Russia as an enemy, you are lying to yourself. You are evading what's really happening. And this has been a problem during World War II, even when we decided to support the Soviet Union. We are still paying the consequences for that.
exactly correct.
And if we can fight against Russia by supporting free people wanting to join the West. Again, when it comes to Ukraine, we are not talking about some sort of Middle Eastern dictatorship like Saudi Arabia, so we have something against Iran. We are talking about people that want to join the West, that want to be more free, that do want to get rid of their corruption. This is not even an Eastern Bloc nation. This nation was part of the Soviet Union. It took America, what, 70, 80 years to get rid of slavery, and you expect Ukraine to get rid of the millennia of authoritarian leadership in decades. Slovakia, when it was first formed, was even more corrupt than or was about as corrupt as Ukraine was decades ago. Now, when we asked to join NATO and when we asked to join Europe at first, Bill Clinton said, no, the ship has sailed because we had a very corrupt leadership during one of our first years. Now we are part of the West. What would happen if we were on board or Russia, and when we tried to join NATO or when we tried to join Europe, we were invaded by Russia? We would never be able to join the West. Uh, Again, these things take time. Getting rid of corruption, modernizing, joining the West takes time.
You notice where the real tension came out yesterday between Trump himself and Zelensky. Zelensky was trying to point out America's self-interest in helping them. He was saying, you guys may not feel it immediately, and you talk about this ocean, but you will feel it eventually. Who are you to say what we'll feel? As if it was emotions that he was talking about, because that's all Trump thinks it in terms of emotions. He was talking about you'll physically feel it. You'll physically feel it. This isn't an emotion that Zelensky was talking about. Zelensky was talking about real world consequences. When the closer they get, the aggressive dictator gets to you, you will feel it in time. If you let him get away with this, you will suffer the consequences. The actual consequences is what Zelensky was talking about. Trump interprets it psychologically. How dare you tell us what to feel? How dare you tell us what we will feel? I guess we're supposed to lay down and to Russian aggression too, because we won't feel badly about it? No, Mr. Trump, you know his fragile ego. He would never permit this. Because if it was under his watch, you see. But if it was under Biden's watch, well, you see, it never would have happened under me. That's all it amounts to for Trump. It's a matter of emotions and his fragile ego, as I keep saying. And that's what makes the emotional response on the part of the right, who are defending Trump right now, so despicable. I mean, to them, it is all a matter of emotions and pride and feeding Trump's ego. And that's how they just go, well, Zelensky screwed up. And this is what I'm hearing a lot on the media. Zelensky screwed up because he should have come in hat in hand, groveled, showed gratitude, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't sufficiently come prepared for Mr. Trump's fragile ego, is the way I hear that. That's
Yeah,
not how a statesman works. That's not how war and peace works. we're talking about, as I keep coming back to, an aggressive dictator. America has a self-interest in stopping that and not rewarding that aggression. And Trump cannot acknowledge that. He cannot say that out loud. I need you too, Mr. Zelensky. Thank you for saving Europe and civilization from Russian aggression. He can't let those words even escape his mouth because Zelensky, like Israel is fighting the war for civilization in the Middle East, so Ukraine has in effect been fighting the war against Russian aggression in Europe. And Mr. Trump cannot let the idea even enter into his brain that somehow Zelensky is doing a good thing for us. Getting back to your thank you thing, because that's the way it should work. Thank you, Mr. Zelensky, for fighting Russian aggression for us. What can we do to help you? Now, I know then Mr. Zelensky said, well, yes, well, the thank yous. Mr. Zelensky spoke to the whole of Congress a couple of years back, and all he could do was say, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. He even started this meeting yesterday with a thank you. But you didn't get thanked enough? You didn't grovel enough? You didn't get on your knees enough to say, Mr. Trump, thank you. It's all because of you, and without you, we wouldn't be. That's what you have to do. You have to appease my ego, feed my sensitive little ego enough. It all talks about, all Trump can talk about is emotional terms like, how dare you dictate to us what we're going to feel. Zelensky wasn't dictating how you're going to feel. He was predicting consequences if we let Russia get away with aggression.
Yeah, now I think in some ways Trump should take sort of a page from Zelensky's book. I'll mention why specifically, but also, during that meeting, Trump said, someone asked him if he compares himself to any historical leaders, and Trump said he compares himself to Washington or Abraham Lincoln, but actually he would consider himself far superior. Now, afterwards, he said he was joking, but such a statement, especially in the Oval Office, should never be stated. Now,
It is a
I think
sacrilege to America. I
now
mean,
I
I am
would
not a religious man. I do not believe in mysticism or faith, but I do hold sacred the principles of liberty and human rights and individual rights. And the greatest heroes defending the cause of individual liberty and individual rights, men like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Abraham Lincoln. Your attitude, Mr. Trump, should be, I would be lucky to be 1% the man that they were. I would be lucky to defend liberty to the historical dimensions that they did. Lincoln in abolishing slavery, setting the agenda for eliminating slavery in the Western Hemisphere. That was a heroism beyond anything I can expect from you, Mr. Trump. You will never, ever live up to the. You pointed out how real leaders and not dictators leave office. George Washington resigned his commission as commander of the Army. George Washington retired after 2 terms before we had term limits in America, setting a policy that wasn't violated until the 20th century in FDR, who was kind of a would-be dictator himself, in my view. In any case, the idea that he has the moral stature of a George Washington is disgusting to me. He has yet to prove that he has actually done so much harm. For example, this instance yesterday. But the point is, whatever his greatest admirers might think are his achievements, he hasn't come up to the dirty bootstraps of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. And to even compare himself in a joke like that is a sacrilege, showing this man does not understand Americanism one little bit. In fact, he has no moral character. To compare him to George Washington's moral character is, as I say, a despicable thing right there. But no moral character and no principles and no ethical and political principles if he can even articulate the idea that he is anything on the scale or scope of the founders of my country. It's just that simply makes me sick. I will get emotional there. That makes me sick to my stomach. The man already thinks he should be carved on Mount Rushmore, as if he created something like the United States and its Bill of Rights, or he saved the Western Hemisphere from slavery like Abraham Lincoln did because of a bloody war. It is disgusting that he should even just compare himself to giants like that, in my view.
Yeah, now
I will get emotional about that.
the reason why you're gonna be more because I have something to read, but to why I said he should take a page from Zelensky's book is because, as for those who don't know, Zelensky used to be a comedian and used to have a show called Servant of the People, which was basically a teacher turned president, and afterwards became a president with his party, Servant of the People, because that's what a public official should be. He's not a sovereign. He's not a dictator. He's not a king. He is someone who should serve the people. And the way Trump thinks of himself, he recently called himself "Long Live the King" when it came to some specific law in New York about congestion pricing or what it was, and he posted a picture of himself on a Time magazine with a crown, which was AI generated picture. Now here is, Trump compared himself to Washington. Here is what Washington said when during the Revolutionary War there was. I think someone suggested that maybe Washington could become a king because America was, or not even America yet, but was in a bad place when it came to fighting the war. So this was his response in just few lines. No occurrence in the course of the war has given me more painful sensations than your information of there being such ideas existing in the army as you have expressed. I am much at loss to conceive what part of my conduct could have given encouragement to an address which to me seems big with the greatest mischiefs that can befall my country. You could not have found a person to whom your schemes are more disagreeable. Now, what would Trump
Repeatedly.
do if his defense secretary or his generals came to him with an option to become a king?
Well, we've heard it from Trump. He said when someone it's not American etiquette to call the president by some fancy title like Your Majesty or Your Excellency or Your Highness or something, as it is in monarchies. But Trump actually said when someone accidentally called him Your Excellency, I like it. I like that. And I said, yeah, I kind of find that cool that someone is giving me this exalted title. And I think that gives us a psychological hint as to where Mr. Trump is coming from. He likes to be called by special titles like Your Excellency, things that America's founding fathers rejected, especially men like George Washington, who was repeatedly saying, I will never be a king. Get the thought out of your head. Anyone suggesting I should be a king is, if you care for your country, if you care for posterity, if you care for your own interest, and if you have any respect for me, please stop saying. I mean, Washington said that repeatedly, repeatedly. He reluctantly took up his positions and he resigned them as soon as he could because he didn't want America to become a dictatorship. One of the differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, we got George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. France got Napoleon, Robespierre first, and then Napoleon. And it had to do with the moral character and the real commitment to freedom and individual rights that America's founders had, as opposed to what was going on in France and the willingness of someone like Napoleon to take over the whole show and try and take over Europe. In this sense, obviously, Mr. Trump is more like Napoleon than Washington or Jefferson.
We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, as always, our president demands loyalty from everyone while he is loyal to no one. I did not vote for this man, and I'd be embarrassed if I had. Well, when
Well,
it comes to sort of being embarrassed for voting for him, I think there is a great amount of information that even came about since the election of Donald Trump that I don't think I can fault as much. Maybe to some extent, but I think what rather than
no.
berating for someone for voting, I think it's on that person to realize if he cannot change his vote. He did, but what he can do is sort of realize what's going on right now and the
Well,
attitude someone should have now.
when America's political situation is such a goddamn sewer right now, that I can't judge people based on, Kamala Harris was an over advocate of censorship. She would have trashed the Constitution. She was, I mean, I don't know, and we don't know what the alternative would have been like either. So, and it's true to use information after he gets reelected is kind of unfair too to the vote. But the point is, it's really not about who you have to vote for. even if you're forced to vote between two kinds of authoritarians and you're trying to choose the lesser of evils, that's a altogether different question. I want to get that out of people's heads. This is not a question of who you voted for. Even if you voted for Trump and you claim to be a defender of, say, reason and individual rights, as we do on this channel, then you have to be critical of Mr. Trump. In fact, you'd have what I can understand the vote on one side or another, given the sewer, the real sewer that American politics has descended into. But what I can't understand is anyone who wouldn't be critical of Mr. Trump when he does something bad. And this is outrageous. This is a moral outrage. And if someone can't see that this is a moral outrage, then they cannot be a defender of reason and individual rights. They simply cannot be. I won't debate about relitigate the last election, because I think in one sense that's impossible to do. But I will say that even if you did vote for Trump, you better have the good sense to criticize him when he does something rotten. And this was pretty rotten. As rotten as I can imagine in a foreign policy context. The thorough betrayal of a victim of a dictatorial aggressor. The idea that you would reward the aggression of a dictator is beyond me, and that's precisely what Mr. Trump is doing, and apparently all about his fragile ego more than actually stopping the bloodshed, which is what he claims his value was. It doesn't even make sense on Trump's own terms. It's a matter of psychology for Mr. Trump. That's why this is so horrific. It bespeaks a man with no moral character. It bespeaks a man who has serious psychological issues that come first, that are more important than his nation's actual interests of America. Because apparently Mr. Trump can't separate in his own mind his personal ego interests versus the interests of the United States, which are certainly not on the side of even rewarding or sanctioning an aggressive dictator, obviously. I mean, it's so historically ignorant, as I say. This is Neville Chamberlain all over. Look, if we give him the Sudetenland, if we let him militarize the Rhineland, we'll get peace in our time. It's that bad, ladies and gentlemen. Here, we'll give you a slice so long and make Zelensky apologize and grovel in the process as we reward Mr. Putin in some way for his aggression. To let that happen, ladies and gentlemen, we've seen that movie before. We sat through that movie before. It was called World War II. And Mr. Trump has the nerve to tell Zelensky, who was the victim of an aggressive invasion, that he's playing with World War III, that he wants to keep the fighting going. Wait. He was the one invaded. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He wanted the fight. He wanted the fight in the first place, Mr. Trump. No. You want the credit for bringing peace, even if it means moral inversion and the rewarding of an aggressive dictator.
We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, James, Trump and Vance should have not behaved like that, not on camera. Yeah, absolutely
Obviously
agree.
not.
I mean, yeah, I think everybody who hasn't watched it should watch it. The whole thing is about, I think, only 50 minutes, but the sort of when they start going at it is about last 10 minutes. But I think even beforehand.
J.D. Vance is a very dangerous man. I think he's much more intelligent and much more articulate than Mr. Trump is. And on the other hand, some of the ideas he advocates are truly and explicitly evil, even more so than Trump. His acceptance speech as vice president of the Republican National Convention last year said America isn't a set of ideas, it's a people, it's a land, it's Blut and soil, I mean, my God, how far does he have to go in terms of being a crude tribalist? And now when he was the one aggressively, since Biden's policy on all this whole thing, as senator, Mr. Vance was against Ukraine. And boy, he saw his opportunity here and he just jumped on it and jumped down Mr. Zelensky's throat without acknowledging Mr. Zelensky, even for 1 minute acknowledging that Mr. Zelensky himself might have some reason to not like Mr. Putin or to need security guarantees. He could have offered one little drop of an olive branch. No, Vance doesn't care about ending the bloodshed any more than Trump cares about ending the bloodshed. It's their aggrandizing their image is all that matters to them, from what I can see on this issue.
Yeah, as I think Zelensky rightly pointed out, yeah, JD Vance cares so much for the life of Ukrainians that he hasn't even ever visited Ukraine. Uh, so yeah, so much for that. Thank you, Vladimir, for your super chat. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert, again. Thank you so much for your super chat. He says, thank you, James and Daniel, for this discussion. Thank you so much. We have a super chat from PC. Thank you. He says, James, it felt like Trump was his boss and he'd done something wrong at work. That's how he was talking to him, like an angry boss. Yeah, I forgot to say that Trump was acting like a mob boss, basically. Someone who you go and say thank you and you bring tribute to for the protection, for basically a protection racket.
Remember that scene at the beginning of The Godfather where the guy asks for help and doesn't call the guy Godfather? And he says, how much should I pay you, rather than, understand that this is a question of favors behind the scenes. No, this is how extortion at the point of a Russian gun sounds like, ladies and gentlemen. What we were hearing from Trump and Vance yesterday was the language of an extortion artist. And here, the threat of extortion is a Russian gun. And they didn't recognize the Russian gun. That's why it's there as the subtle extortion. You should be groveling. You shouldn't disrespect me. Your country maybe have been the victim of aggressive warfare, but you need to grovel enough before me and not show me any kind of disrespect, or to give me a history lesson on what your country has gone through over the last 11 years. I mean, despicable extortion artist, bully behavior. And that's the other bizarre thing. They'll say Zelensky thought he could come and bully the president of the United States. No, I really doubt that Mr. Zelensky thought that his hand, well, to use the card analogy, that his hand was so strong. We're not playing cards here, as Zelensky pointed out. And Zelensky did not come thinking that the cards he was dealt was so strong that he could, quote, bully the president of the United States. That is absurd on the face of it. What he was saying is, see, people would say, well, he got so spoiled. He's a spoiled little brat under Biden. What? I mean, wait a minute. His country was invaded. His country is still 20% occupied by the Russian army. He knows he's got trouble. He knows there's been suffering. He doesn't want warfare. They act as though he is the threat. He is the bully. He is the aggressor. No, that only makes sense if you really believe that Zelensky is the aggressor. And ladies and gentlemen, Zelensky was not the aggressor. Putin was. And Trump is in effect extorting Zelensky for the minerals at the point of a Russian gun.
And also moral outrage is warranted. I mean, passivity or sort of, there is a certain view of the good and view of the virtues, and passivity or sort of saying, well, that doesn't involve me. If you see someone who's on the streets getting beaten up and you don't do anything, you say, well, there are other people there, so why should I do something? You are helping to enable that. You are allowing that to happen. If you see injustice being done, if you see something evil being committed, and your reaction is, how is that my problem? That's evil. That is absolutely moral depravity.
If you can do something and you don't, you're acting suicidally. You're not even acting in your own self-interest if you can do something and you don't. And even if you can't do something, if you can't at least even identify who the morally correct and the morally wrong people are in the situation, that is the very worst. Because what you've done is you've now taken the rug from underneath any moral, rational response by anyone at any point, even in the future. You're absolutely correct. If you sit by and you can do something and you don't, then you are sanctioning it. Yeah. And when it comes to an aggressive dictator, I've said this many times on the show in many different contexts, to sanction aggressive dictatorship is against your own self-interest. Always, anywhere. It's a threat to any semi-civilized country on this planet, any country that wants to live in peace on this planet. There is no hope for this world if we allow aggressive dictators to get away with it. That problem must be snipped in the bud just as soon as possible. And if the Nazis did not teach us that, if the whole Neville Chamberlain experience did not teach us that, Mr. Trump is historically beyond willfully ignorant. Yeah, don't worry. He'll be satisfied with Sudetenland and remilitarizing the Rhineland. Yeah, after that, don't worry, everything will be cool. Shh.
We have a super chat from Faye. Thank you so much. A super chat from Gail. Thank you so much. Super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. Super chat from Jeanette. Thank you so much. She says, "Thank you for your righteous, thoughtful, and thorough analysis." Well, there's a bit more where that came from. And thank you, Roland, for your super chat. He says Chamberlain's approach was dead wrong, but it may still be explained as an innocent mistake in a climate of altruism. Not the case this time. I think even back then, it's not impossible to imagine why a dictator wouldn't really care for just stopping because you already ceded or seceded a little bit. Now, the climate I could understand is the fact that neither the French or British Republic was really eager to have a war, but that's still a problem view to have. You have to recognize that we failed, and there is what is that quote from Churchill? You wanted to avoid war. How does it go? James, say something, I'll look it up.
Okay. Well, but if it was inexcusable at the time, and it kind of was because they'd just lived through World War One and they saw the nature of the Nazi regime. That's what I would point out. Once you see the nature of the Nazi regime, there's really no excuse for what Neville Chamberlain did. But to do it now, after we've had that horrific experience, I mean, that should teach us for all time the dangers of letting aggressive dictators get away with their aggression. That will not stop it. It will only feed it.
Yeah, the quote is, "You are given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war," which is,
That's
I think,
it.
the exact.
That's
Uh,
it. And that the same applies with Mr. Trump and his claim that he wants to end the bloodshed. No, he didn't. I mean, his behavior yesterday was not the behavior of a statesman who wants to end bloodshed at all, was it?
Now, for about half an hour, I wanted to break this up because something that JD Vance brought up is, did you even say thank you once during this sitting, or I don't know what specifically he said. So when this brief conference started, the first thing out of Zelensky's mouth was, "Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you for the invitation." So again, not to mention Ukraine is fighting the Western war against dictatorship, against Russia. There is also something that was brought to my attention by Brian Macbeth, who's a great sort of intelligence analysis when it comes to specifically NATO and wars. He said that there is a thing called JTEC or JATEC. It's a Ukraine NATO organization to basically share information. So the officers from the West can find out about how the modern war is fighting. That is priceless
Valuable.
information. The same thing as during the American Civil War, you had a lot of Europeans observing how the modern war, because the American Civil War was one of the first instances of trench warfare, one of the first instances of sort of the new way the war is going to be fought, and it's invaluable information. The sort of total war that we had during World War II. The first instance of that was during the American Civil War. So this is priceless information to get. Ukraine has been thanking the West incredibly with, not to mention, everything will be paid. I mean, even when it came to World War II Lend-Lease, do you know when England managed to finally pay off its Lend-Lease from World War II? It was in like early 2000s or like late 90s. So yeah, this stuff takes time, but those countries that do succeed and then they are able to, not to mention Russia should not pay the war reparations, obviously. I'm not sure if we'll
Well,
manage to get it, especially if we are not planning to put any pressure on Russia.
Mr. Trump, it wasn't the terms under which the aid was originally given. You're actually asking Ukraine to change the deal. And guess what? Zelensky was willing to do that. It isn't a function of gratitude. It isn't even a function of getting, quote, paid back. To look at it in economic terms, when it comes to the security of civilization, when it comes to the security of the Western world, is wrong. Like I say, even if Europe wasn't as I said earlier, Zelensky came to a joint session of Congress, spoke, and he was effusive in his gratitude and thanks to America. But the point is that, as you pointed out, it's a thank you, because America's getting something very important too. Mr. Zelensky is fighting Russian aggression for us and for the rest of Europe. And even if Europe
Well,
wasn't,
he is fighting it for himself. It just happens to be that by the fact that Russia is also our enemy, he's fighting our.
I
But he's
don't
not
see a
fighting it
conflict.
altruistically on our behalf.
Exactly. I do not see a conflict of interest between rational people who share values. There is no conflict of interest between rational men, as Ayn Rand pointed out. And here there is no conflict of interest. It's like you say, it's that Stossel example of thank you, trade to mutual advantage. I'll help you here, you because you're doing that. Hey, it's good for us if you stop Russian aggression. Of course, your country has just been invaded. You have a direct selfish interest in pushing them back and out. Of course, I'm not denying that Zelensky has a selfish interest in all this. I'm saying America has a selfish interest in all this that Trump refuses to recognize, so that he can't give the thank you back to the thank you that Zelensky has repeatedly offered the United States. Zelensky is fighting for his own country, obviously, but just as Israel is fighting for their own survival. But in both cases, they're doing something, they're giving us in the West a benefit for. And we should acknowledge that. And that's why we're helping them. We're helping them because we too have a self. Look, if this was pure altruism on our part, I'd say don't do it. I would be opposed. I'd be opposed to military action where it's pure altruism. And I think Vietnam War is a classic example of it. Oh, how long we stayed in Afghanistan so that we could create democracy there. That was pure altruism. There are cases where war is pure altruism, and we shouldn't do it. It's only when it's mutual advantage and where we have a cause, on the line. And Trump refuses to recognize that America has self-interest here. We have a cause on the line. We cannot allow Russia to win a war of aggression. You cannot appease an aggressive dictator. I will say again and again and again. It is in every civilized nation's interest that aggressive dictators be stopped. Unless you want to live under a dictatorship.
Yeah. What else is there real? Well, I'll just bring up again the point of people saying, Zelensky has failed because he should have anticipated how Trump is going to react. He should have appeased Trump. He should have sort of, said nice words about Trump.
Probably.
Maybe come up with some Ukrainian civil award that he
Yeah, I
would
am a
give to Trump.
dictator, and yeah, I started the war, and yeah, we shouldn't have asked for NATO membership at all. And yeah, of course, we're such an awful country. Oh, and yeah, and you didn't like Biden's policy, and I'm sorry I accepted all that Biden help. How much groveling did he want? No, 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 no. That's not how it works. A decent statesman, a decent diplomat is not going to let that kind of issue get in the way of a deal. And it was Trump and Vance who let that get in the way of this deal. When Zelensky said, "Hey, wait about security concerns," or "Hey, do you know the history of the situation when we were been invaded repeatedly?" They could have said, "We understand. We don't worry." They could have thrown him, something. They could have given him some kind of. They didn't. No one had to grovel here. If Zelensky needed to grovel, if America can't recognize its own self-interest in all of this, then what's the basis for the deal in the first place? No. Trump is saying, therefore, well, we'll act altruistically if we can get something back from it, the mineral deal. Otherwise, screw you, in effect, so that he can look strong and good and save America money and, hey, get this great financial deal and rare earth minerals for America. America first is his excuse there, but it's really just an ego playing out because, look, he didn't get his mineral deal yesterday, did he?
Yeah, and that's sort of advice to Zelensky that, he needs to find out, he needs to realize how to deal with irrationality of other people. Sort of reminds me of one quote, well, but what can you do when you have to deal with people? Basically, you just need to figure out how to deal with irrationality of others. You should never demand something better from others. You should never demand some respect from others. You should just,
Well, I guess we were on notice. Like I pointed out, Mr. Trump has said he likes being called by special titles like Your Excellency. So I guess Zelensky should have come aware that this man's ego is that fragile. And perhaps he should have called him Your Excellency or Your Majesty or something to really appease him. Is that really where we're at now? See, like
yeah,
I said, the whole thing with the emotions. It's people's, their pride, their nose gets bent out of shape and their pride gets hurt. And so what we have to do is we have to appease their fragile little egos. No, 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 no. We're talking about war and peace. We're talking about world leaders here. The fact that it was ever like that is surely at least as much Trump's fault as anyone who wasn't appeasing Mr. Trump's weird narcissistic psychological issues. Okay, maybe Zelensky should have been more appeasing of this madman's psychology. He was on notice that the guy has a fragile ego, but a statesman shouldn't need to do that. A statesman should transcend that when we're talking about war and peace. That shouldn't be what the whole meeting hinges on. And that was a failure on the part of Trump and Vance. Trump
yeah,
and Vance owe Zelensky and the world an apology. I do not expect it. Zelensky probably will be the one to apologize, in fact, and because his country is in so much need of Western aid to carry on this war. So it probably Mr. Zelensky will deliver an apology. It'll make me sick to my stomach that is actually owed him by Mr. Trump and Vance, in my view.
yeah. I mean, right after, basically after this conversation, Zelensky was kicked out of the White House, and so there was no evil deal signed. Afterwards, Zelensky pretty much put out the statement saying thanking Trump for sort of inviting him, sort of pretty much made like normal, respectful way, and Trump went on about Zelensky. Now, I
Oh, and
do,
notice the things that they
yeah,
criticized Zelensky for. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing a suit. Oh, well, you see, that was offensive. See, if what you're at, if my Trump supporting friends, if you're at the point of defending Trump to the extent of saying he didn't wear a suit was the reason, or tried to give Vance a history lesson was the reason, or he wasn't groveling, thanking them enough was the reason, then, ladies and gentlemen, what you're defending is Trump's psychological needs, not America's real interests.
yeah, and I like the sort of recent fact that Trump is getting some pushback because when it came to journalists, he's pretty much getting no pushback. When it comes to sort of questions, the only thing we've seen is now from Zelensky, recently from Emmanuel Macron, who also started correcting Trump during. He was pretty much the only one willing to say, "Hey, Trump is making shit up." Also and yeah, it sort of reminds me of that needs like Trump needs accountability. No one is providing him accountability. He can lie and nothing will happen. It reminds me of the vice presidential debate. I think one of the craziest moments that wasn't spoken about is basically there was a question for both candidates. Now I don't even remember his name now. Whoever was the VP for
Governor of
Mike.
Minnesota, Mr. Walz, right?
Yeah, Mr. Wolf. He was asked, well, didn't you lie 40 years ago that you went into China and you were there during the Tiananmen Square massacre or something like that? So basically, did you lie 40 years ago? And then a question for Vance was, do you acknowledge 2020 election? And JD Vance said, well, he pretty much refused to, and they are still refusing to acknowledge the 2020 election. So the sort of double standard, I think, the fact that it no longer matters is pretty abhorrent, and the fact that there is no expectation of the politicians to. I mean, for a while there wasn't, but I think it's the most sort of visible now with Trump. The fact that he can say one day one thing, he can say the exact opposite thing, and we just sort of go along because what can we do? Um, so yeah, James, any last thoughts on this?
I think I've made my position clear on this. I really think this was maybe the low ebb of any kind of. I can't say that I've ever had, personal respect for Mr. Trump, but this is a low ebb of my disrespect for Mr. Trump that he could really that a man representing a country whose country is 1/5 occupied by a foreign invader could be treated like that by the President of the United States, a president who cannot think conceptually and whose own fragile ego, as I say, seem to be more important than the safety of Ukrainians or the security of Europe, I find reprehensible. And I've tried to remain as emotion free as possible in saying that, because I think the whole discussion here has been fraught with pure emotion in the way it's handled. But it's worthy of getting emotional. I mean, we're talking about war and peace here. We're talking about the sanctioning of aggressive dictatorship. We're talking about Putin getting away with mass murder. And for Trump to conduct himself like that, for Mr. Vance, who really stepped it up and made it all the worse yesterday, to act like that is not something that I think any Republican out there should be proud of or defending, even if they did vote for Mr. Trump. It's pretty awful what happened yesterday. And all apparently for Mr. Trump's ego, not about war, peace, or ending bloodshed, or stopping a dictator, or what was really going on here, morally speaking. And that's really all I have to say. My prediction: Zelensky will apologize, and Mr. Trump does have, you see, an interest in getting some kind of deal done. So Zelensky will come hat in hand with an apology, and when he sufficiently kisses the ring of Mr. Trump will then have some kind of deal. But it won't be good for the. I can tell you right now, it won't be good for the West. That train has already left the station, and it left the station big time yesterday with the way Mr. Zelensky was treated.
Yeah, so we'll continue following this, especially what this would mean. Trump is apparently not stopping any aid going into Ukraine so far, but also there is no sort of move on the deal. So the upcoming days might be decisive, might be not. It's Trump, so he might ignore what happened and not actually do anything with that. We'll have to see. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. It's going to be Razi and Moshe Feiglin again, so make sure to tune into that. It's already scheduled, so we can sort of, I think, bookmark it, or there is like a way for YouTube to remind you. And even if you're a subscriber, it's going to be. So thank you, James, for joining me today for a much longer than usual episode, but I think important one. And as I've said, we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and bye bye.
Bye bye.